Thanks, Dan, for leading us in those beautiful songs. Dan always has the knack for choosing songs that we all enjoy singing, so thanks very much. Also, you should take a minute to thank Dan for taking care of all our electronics and all the other small things that Dan does. We do appreciate that so much. Also, you notice that there are no more pew ribbons on here. And I'm going to get a blast from Jim for that, but I took it upon myself to ask Brother Rob to take those down. I think we're about ready. I said it looked nice when I walked in, so not anything against Jim. He's just trying to do it, but I probably should have asked him first. Anyway, I want to talk to you this morning about something that affects every single one of us. And this is the ability to find some little bit of peace in our lives. Sometimes our lives get so conflicted and confused, and there's so much tumult in our lives, so many things that seem to be going wrong. You say, Lord, where is the peace in my life? Well, if we go back to the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verses 1 through 7, we can read a list of the attributes that give us the sense of the description about what the coming Messiah would have about him that would make people be attracted to him, what he was going to do. And I'm not going to read the whole verses and everything, but this person would bring light to the world. In verse 2, you can read that. In verse 3, he would increase the people's happiness. And then in verse 4, he said he would lift heavy burdens from those who are under oppression. In verse 5, is a curious verse here. It talks about a cloak that was rolled in blood is now going to be thrown into the fire. And it took me a while to kind of parse this out and figure out what this was talking about, because it doesn't seem to fit in this description. But what a cloak on a battlefield, a cloak or the outer garment that a soldier had, if it was rolled in blood, I mean, this guy got badly hurt. I mean, he's bleeding to death. And he said, what the Messiah is going to bring is that's going to be no more. It'll be just worth throwing it in the fire because you don't need it anymore. In other words, he's going to stop these conflicts, these deadly conflicts that people have. He would appear as a child, the son of the nation of Israel. That's in verse 5. And then I jump to verse 7. He was the head of a government that will have no end. And then we were talking about the book of Daniel this morning in the Bible class. We were kind of getting to that point where we're going to talk about the rock that was uncut by hands, and its dominion would have no end. And that kind of fits right along with what Isaiah talks about the Messiah. And in verse 6, he gives us these titles of what the Messiah or the Savior. The Messiah is just a Hebrew word that means Savior in English. That's all it means. And among his titles would be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, and then Prince of Peace. And that's the one I want to talk about this morning, is this title, the Prince of Peace. In verse 7, he also says that the kingdom that is established by the Prince of Peace will be known for its justice and righteousness forever. Now, this prophecy was written approximately 700 years before Jesus was born. And I think it's absolutely amazing. And the reason it's amazing because there is no human personage that could fit that description. In the history of the known world, you cannot find a man who fits all that description except for the man we know as Jesus. During the history of most of our history, as a matter of fact, I think historians have gone back, and the only time they could find was about 20 years where there was no warfare going on the earth. At the time, there was strife and warfare someplace. James alludes to this constant conflict in James chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. And this is what James said. What is the source of your quarrels and conflicts among you? Well, I think that's a great question, because if you have quarrels and conflicts, you don't have any peace. So he's posing this question. What is it that causes you to have all these conflicts? Why don't you have peace in your life? I'm going to tell you why. Is it not the source your pleasures that wage war in your members? And he continues, you lust and do not have, so you commit murder. You are envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask, but you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motive so that you may spend it on your pleasures. So you see what James is saying here. Now, you have to realize the word lust, when we use that, immediately has a sexual connotation. When James is talking about the lust is a great desire for something that supplants anything else in your life. That's what lust is. It obliviates everything else. You want that thing. You lust after it. Doesn't matter what it is. And he says, the reason that you don't have those things that you lust after is because you're asking in the wrong motives. Instead of asking God, God, please give me the things that will lead to peace, we say, I want that new car, God. Can you figure out a way to get me that new car? Or I want that big new mansion on the hill because I just got to have it. Figure out a way to give me the money, or make me beautiful, or make me rich, or make me politically influential. All the wrong motives. That's why you don't get what you want. Now, James' comments were directed at the Christian brethren, but they are applicable to everyone in the world. What he's saying is you don't have, so you fight, and then you murder. You kill people. Wars are simply an extension of this personal want. I'm sure that every dictator and war chieftain that has ever been has used the excuse that he was aggressively pursuing this military action to prevent a further war or to prevent future attacks on his. No, he's going there because he wants something. He wants something they have, and he can't get it through any other means, so he goes and beats them up and takes what he wants. This is what personal interactions are. You have something I want, you won't let me use it, you won't let me see it, you won't let me have it, then I'll beat you to death, and I'll take it. It comes down to wanting what is not yours, and you're willing to murder to get it. This is what James is talking about. This is the basis of all conflict, human conflict. I want what I can't have, and I'm going to do something about it. Well, when you're 2 years old, it's a little different. I want the lollipop. You can't have a lollipop. I want the lollipop. You can't have the lollipop. Tantrums, crying, screaming, jumping up and down. And parents have to say, sorry, you jump all you want, but you're not getting a lollipop. Well, with kids, that works. Now try doing that with an adult. He'll take a baseball bat and beat your head and say, yeah, I got my lollipop. I'll see ya. It's different with adults. Children don't understand the right and the wrong. They don't get it. It takes a while. You got to train them. But with adults, we expect them to get that, and they don't get it. Isaiah calls Jesus the Prince of Peace, and yet the world engages continually in warfare. Something is not right. How can he be the Prince of Peace when we have all this war going on in the world? Something doesn't fit here. Well, I said, well, I better look into this and see what it says. John in chapter 12:47, he said, this is what Jesus says about himself. So I figured, let's go back and see what Jesus talks about himself. Why not go right to the Jesus, right? And see, not what others said, but what he says about himself. This is what John says. I did not come to judge the world, but to save it. All right, that agrees with Isaiah, Prince of Peace. And then in John 3:17, he says, for God did not send the Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world may be saved through him. I said, yeah, okay, save, peace, so on and so forth. So I was thinking about the other statements that Jesus made concerning himself and the effect it would have on the world. So you go to Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 36, and he's talking to the 12 disciples. So this is a conversation he's having with his guys, his troops, right? These are the guys around him. And he says, I did not come to judge the world, but to save it. Okay? This agrees with John 3:17. Most people read John 3:16, but they don't go to 17. For God did not send the Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world may be saved through him. So far we're doing good. This all agrees. Well, there's a few other statements. In Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 36, here's what he says. Do not think that I came to bring peace to the earth. Hold it. Isaiah says he's the Prince of Peace. Jesus is testifying. Do not think I came to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Wait a minute, a sword. What's the sword? Is an instrument of death. It's an instrument of warfare. For I came to set man against his father, and daughter against her mother, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. That's verse 35. A man's enemies will be members of his own household. Verse 36. Ooh, we're getting into a lot of strife and conflict here. How does this match up with Isaiah's calling the Prince of Peace? So, well, I truly believe the Bible does not have conflicts in it. And I truly believe that we have the ability to read whatever we want into it if we try hard enough. So there must be a way to resolve this, in my mind, hopefully yours, resolve this issue, which it appears that Jesus he's in conflict with Isaiah saying. So there's got to be a way for us to understand this and apply it. You know, when Jesus said that, that was not the first time that's been said. If you go to Micah chapter 7, verses 6, it says basically the same thing. So Jesus is quoting from the Old Testament. And he did that quite often. So here he was to save the world, not to bring peace to the world, and a sword. I'm having a problem with this. However, I think there's a way to reconcile this. It seems that Jesus is refuting Isaiah, but I think he's actually agreeing with Isaiah. And there's two questions that we have to ask here that are key to resolving this. The first one is, to whom will Jesus be the Prince of Peace? To everyone or a select group? And then the second one to this question is, Isaiah talks about his everlasting government. And what is the government that will be everlasting? It's Isaiah chapter 9, verse 7. We answer those two questions, we're going to get a pretty good idea of what the resolution is here. So initially, when I read government will be upon his shoulders, I immediately think the government of the world. It's going to be upon his shoulders. Why? Because that's what I deal with every day. We all of us, we deal with the governments here on this world. And this, I think, is exactly what the disciples said. Lord, when is the kingdom going to come? Right? They believed that he was going to be the king right here. And everybody thinks that the disciples were marvelous and they got all that. It took them a while to catch on. They didn't get it initially following Jesus. It took them several years. Jesus spent about 3 years training these guys. And they finally got the message. Even after the execution of Jesus, they still didn't quite get it yet. So Isaiah here is calling him the Prince of Peace. And I think what he's saying is that he's the Prince of Peace to those that adhere to the principles that he has set down for our lives. And I'll explain this a little bit more. You know, Paul kind of addresses this in 2 Thessalonians 3:16. And says, now may the Lord of peace himself continually grant you peace in every circumstance. He's saying that Jesus has the ability to grant peace. Well, if he's able to grant peace, it means that there's not the whole world. He just doesn't give it out. There's a select group. Who's Paul talking to? He's talking to Christians here. And I think what's implied is that if you walk in the footsteps of Jesus, he can grant you that peace. Now, the corollary to that is if you're not walking in his footsteps, you don't get any peace. So now we're starting to get a better idea here about what the Prince of Peace means. We're not talking about the world in general, although the offer is there to the world in general. Not everybody is going to find it. The idea of being in subjection to Jesus and the words that Jesus spoke enables us to get peace. As I said, those who are not in subjection, essentially, they're faced with the sword. That's the opposite, because he talked about the sword. So what does the sword represent? It represents capital punishment. It represents discipline. It represents conflict, warfare, all the other things. And it goes from emotional warfare. It doesn't have to be bloodshed. Emotional warfare, physiological, your body is in warfare with the elements. And psychological warfare besides actual physical warfare. People want and cannot have what they want, so they resort to violence to get it. And Christians have to learn to curb envy through the teachings of Jesus Christ. Envy, I want that, I like it, I want it. We learn not to want those things that are not proper or good for us. What do we teach our children? I want that, but Johnny's got that truck, but I want that truck. I'm going to go take it from Johnny and push him out of the sandbox. You can't do that. It's not your truck, that's his truck. You can ask him if you can play with it, but you can't take it. I want it. No, you can't do that. And you go over it. Eventually they learn these things. You remember about Paul, he told us he had to learn to be happy. He said, I've learned to deal with much or to deal with little, whatever the situation is. He said, I have learned to be content regardless of my circumstances. That's in Philippians 4:11. He had to learn this. Now, if Paul had to learn it, it means we have to learn it too. That doesn't come, You don't get it. You're not born with it. You have to learn to be content. Now, content means to be without great concern for that which is not available. Another passage is written that God supplies what we need, 2 Corinthians 9:12. He supplies what we need. I'm looking at Glenda because she and I have discussed this many times. What we need is different from what we want. God gives us what we need. It may not be what you want, but He's going to give you what you need. Look at it this way. If God supplies what we need, and I didn't say want, He supplies us what we need, and there are things that we think we need, but we aren't getting, and we continue to desire those things excessively, are we not fighting against God? There's a logic in that. God gives us what we need. We want this. We're not getting it, and we excess over it. That's all we look at. We want that. We want that. You're fighting against God. God's telling you don't need that. You say, yeah, but it would be great to have it. Yeah, it may be great to have it, but you don't need it. So if God provides for us, His obedient children, and we learn to be content with our situation as Paul did, does not this remove the conflict and strife from our lives? Sometimes it does. Sometimes God actually removes the item that is causing conflict and strife. Yeah, it's gone. Other times we have to learn how to deal with it. This is not, I'm not saying that because we're Christians, Satan is not going to poke and prod us all the time. He's there, and he's going to continue to try. Why? Because we're a bigger catch than the average guy in the street. He turns one of us, he's going to be smiling. He's, look at guy, hey, I got one of yours, These other people, yeah, I had them all the time anyhow, it doesn't matter. Satan wants what he can't get, right? He'll push, prod, place things before us that are enticing. These things all have an element of truth. Remember Satan in the Garden of Eden. Did God really say that you can't eat that and you're going to die? Well, God said if you eat of it, you will die. But He's talking about spiritual death. But Satan's talking about mortal death. And of course, then you get into the whole Garden of Eden. We've gone through that before. I'm not going to belabor that point. But Satan always has an element of truth in anything he does and says. And if you focus simply on that little tiny bit of truth, you're going to buy the whole bunch of lies that come along with it. Do you ever think about, I've thought about Satan. Satan, you know what Satan is? Satan is poison for your soul. I was talking with Bill. Bill's on doing chemo. You know what chemo is? Chemo is a poison. They're putting a poison in your body that's going to kill the cancer. Hopefully you're going to live through the rest of it. And it makes you sick and you don't feel good. But Satan does the same thing. He's giving you poison, but it's for your soul. Jesus is the Prince of Peace, the peace bringer, the peace sustainer. If you are a child, His child, you can request from Him that He lift the burdens that are placed on your shoulders from work, personal relationships, bad habits, envy, whatever it is that is not bringing peace to your life. Talking about this everlasting government, you remember what Jesus said to Pilate. Pilate says, so I hear you're the king of the Jews. And Jesus says, yeah, I am. So Pilate more or less asked, so how does that work? He says, well, my kingdom is not of this world. And Pilate says, well, what are you doing here? Let this guy go. But of course, Pilate being a situational ethicist, if you want to call his works ethics at all. He was more afraid what the Jews were going to do than freeing an innocent man. So he goes to the Jews and he makes this big show. Should I give you Barabbas or do you give you Jesus? No, I'll give us Barabbas. Kill this guy or kill Jesus. I can see Satan in the crowd saying, crucify him, crucify him. Getting the crowd to call for Jesus' crucifixion. But to Jesus' own admission, his kingdom is not of this world. It was not a threat to the Roman government. He wasn't in competition for the Roman government. He had it was a spiritual kingdom. And that's why Isaiah can say that his government will be established forever. And it is, right now. It is established. The kingdom has come. Those of you who are used to praying the model prayer says, you pray for the kingdom to come, take that out of there because the kingdom is here. The kingdom started right after Jesus' death. Essentially, the old law was nailed to the cross and the new law began. But it really started in Acts 2:38 when they were all gathered in Jerusalem and the apostles were speaking to them in tongues that they had not studied, and they preached the gospel, and over 5,000 came forward and were immersed that day. That was the beginning of the church, if you will. Jesus, the church that Christ established. You know, some people have this concept that if you pray for Jesus, pray to Jesus, you want peace in your life, then he opens up the top of your head, he takes a chunk of Holy Spirit, throws it in there, closes it up, and says, okay, you got it. Don't work that way. It does not work that way. It's never happened. We learn through the Word. This is how we get it. And this is why God has preserved this through 2,000 years more, going back all the way to the creation. Because we learn through the Word. This is one of the problems with illiteracy. Illiteracy is detrimental. And you can still learn by hearing. But the hearing that you have has to come from this. But when you can read for yourself, you can go back and study it again and again and again, and you can learn from it. Paul had to learn to be content. Well, you know, Paul was a pretty violent guy prior to him on that road to Damascus. Well, you say, what was he doing on the road to Damascus? Well, he and his guys were going up there. They were going to look for Christian Jews. This is Jews who had become Christians. They had been immersed in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of their sins. And he was going to look for them. He was going to take them and throw them in the jail, the Jewish jail. And he had these guys with him. So he's on the road to Damascus, and he has a big flash of light, and he hears God speaking to him and everything. He said, but the others just thought it was thunder and noise. Who were these other guys with him? Do you know who they were? I'm convinced that was his muscle. He was going to collect these guys, and if anybody resisted, he'd say, hey guys, go in there and take this guy out. Drag him into jail. Whole families. And Paul was not afraid to use violence. He dragged him screaming and kicking out of there. That's violence. You're going against your will. He physically made you go to jail. And he was doing that. And later on, he says, I realize now that was not the right thing to do, but I did it with a clear conscience because I believed in my heart I was doing the right thing. He says it didn't absolve me from doing it because he says he was the chief sinner, right? He says, of all people, I am the chief sinner. But the thing is, he did it with a clear conscience. I can't find any place where after Paul was immersed that he resorted to those kinds of tactics. What did he resort to? Quoting the scriptures, telling what he had seen and heard from Jesus Christ, explaining how peace can come into your life. He never again resorted to violence. Others resorted to violence against him. He was shipwrecked, he was beaten, he was stoned, but he himself didn't resort to it. Why? He had peace in his life. With all the things that Paul had to deal with, he found the element of peace. He learned how to be content. That doesn't mean that Paul didn't try. How many times did Paul pray to God and say, yeah, take this thorn on my side? Now, some have said the thorn on the side literally was a pain in his side, something that he had. Others said it was his eyesight was failing, but he used the term thorn in the side. Something bothered him tremendously where it was depriving him of having a happier life, if you want to use that term. And after the third time, Paul says, God revealed to me that his grace was sufficient for me. And then Paul dropped it. You never hear about that, the thorn in the side. And I have a suspicion that one of the reasons why Luke started traveling with Paul was to provide some relief from whatever that condition was. What was Luke? Luke was a physician. He was very good at his job. Not only was he a great writer, but he was a trained physician. I think Paul prayed for this, and God said, look, my grace is sufficient. And he answered Paul in a way. He just didn't remove the pain. God works in very funny ways sometimes. So there's Luke, and all of a sudden Paul is traveling all over the Mediterranean. And he's speaking, he's preaching, he's writing. He's doing all kinds of things which that pain may have prevented him from doing before. But he's able to do it. And Luke is there with him. So I think Jesus gave him peace and understanding so he could do his job. And this is exactly what is available to us. If we are constantly kicking against all the restraints and things we have to deal with on a daily basis, we don't have peace in our lives. There came a point in my life, and this is while I was still working, teaching at the community college. And I had a lot of pressure at work and kids and families and houses and car friendships, and I got to simplify my life. I can't keep doing this. So I started saying, okay, how am I going to simplify my life? And I came to the conclusion that one of the ways to do this was to take a look at all the things that you're involved with. What things are really important and what things are not so important. Another thing, what things do I really need, and then what things are on the want list. Again, we get back to the needs and wants. And I began to not pay so much attention to these other things that were not part of what you need. What do you need? You need your family. You need Jesus Christ in your life. Preferably Jesus Christ first, your family second, then your job concerns to maintain so you put groceries on the table. I didn't work because I wanted to work and do that. I wanted because I had bills to pay. I mean, I enjoyed what I did. I can't deny that. I was very fortunate in my job. It was really very nice. But the fact is, we're made to work, so you got to find something to do. If I didn't do that, I'd do something else. If I hadn't met Linda, I'd probably be a grease monkey. That's my natural proclivity, is to go and tinker with things and get dirty. She changed my mind a little bit. But the idea is God brought me to a position where I had to realize that I can no longer continue to look at my life that way. It needed to be simplified. I needed to have an element of peace in my life. And that peace that he provided for me gave me some more happiness. And you got to admit, happiness is a rare commodity in today's life, because we're inundated with all kinds of junk and garbage. Turn on daytime TV and see if you can find something in it that isn't trying to sell you pharmaceuticals. Or Joe Namath trying to get you to go for your Medicare. You're going to get $140 extra. You don't get that. They give you $140, they take $140. You don't get it. But that's what you get. It's advertising. You cannot look at TV as informational. It's not, even the news is not informational. It is purely there because they make a profit doing it. That's why they do it. Even we used to be the public television network, right? It's supposed to be for the public. Watch it for a few. It is not. It's advertising. All the time. They're trying to they provide you with some entertainment so they can give you the advertising to get you to buy and spend your money, your time, and your energy. Anything that you hear on TV, do not believe. So some would say, well, yeah, but I'm not Paul. There's no way I can live up to that standard. Well, you're absolutely 100% right. No one can live up to the standard because we all fall short of the glory of God. We all do. So then how do I do this? And you need help. How do I get the help? You have a support system with your Christian brothers and sisters, but primarily you have access to Jesus Christ. The Jews didn't have that. Under the old law, they had to go through a priesthood and sacrifices and all these other things. They did not have direct access to the president's door where you could just knock on it and go in. You had to go through, first they got a guard with an AK-47 standing at the door. Then you had to go through his secretary. Then you had to go to the secretary's boss. Then you had to go through a vice president. Then you had, finally, you may get to the president. And to the Jews, that's how the way God was. He was way up there in the president's office. We don't have that. Jesus is right here in the room next door. He's right here in this room. We are so fortunate. So even though we are not Paul, Paul had to do the same thing. On the road to Damascus, Paul, Paul, why are you kicking against the goads? Yes, Lord, what? Why are you beating up on all my people? And Paul got the message. When he finally got there, Ananias comes to him and said, Paul, you need to be immersed. So Paul fasted, he prayed, and then he was immediately immersed. And from that point on, violence was gone from his life. Peace began to enter it. He had a lot of work to do. He had concerns, but he still had peace because he knew he was at peace with God. He could be at peace with his Christian brothers and sisters. I'm firmly convinced that it is only through Jesus Christ that we can find peace in our lives. So the answer is, well, in the world, that is why there's no peace in the world, because they have not sought out Jesus Christ. This is why there will be continuous wars and rumors of wars all over continually until he comes again. But we have the advantage. The whole world actually is available to that advantage if they simply read the book and are obedient to it, but they refuse. Those of us who have given our lives to Jesus Christ find more peace every day. Now, there's some days when it doesn't seem very peaceful. I will admit that. Linda and I were sitting right in our little backyard area there. The sun was coming down, not too much wind. The birds were in the bird feeder. The dogs were lying there. And I had to say, thank you, Lord. I mean, really, when you get down to it, what more do you need? Sure, I've got a nice house and I got nice cars and all that. But I could still enjoy the sunshine and the birds and the dogs and my wife, whether I had nothing or whether I had much. I've learned to be content. And believe me, in my life, I've had both ends of it. But God provides that through Jesus Christ. So I don't think there's any contradiction when Isaiah says that he is the Prince of Peace. Yes, he is the Prince of Peace. For those that love him, peace and grace abound. For those that do not love him, the sword awaits. It's as simple as that. Isaiah was telling the truth. Jesus was telling the truth. The gospel and the Old Testament, they mesh. The stories are complete and they are truthful. Men take the gospel message and they twist it to their own devices. This is why we're here in the New Testament. Vicious wolves will come amongst us. And we've seen that here in this congregation. This congregation has split twice because of that. People teaching wrong things, holding to wrong values, not submitting themselves to Jesus. But we're still here. Brothers and sisters, appreciate your time. For those of you who have not been immersed for the forgiveness of your sins, I would suggest that now is a good day to do that. There's a water behind me that can be filled up in a short period of time. I'm sure Dan's got extra songs that he can sing as we wait for the water to fill up. If you're subject to that call, you're ready to join the ranks of Jesus Christ's children, then you can come forward and join me at the front. If you have something else that needs to be addressed in prayer by the congregation, please come up front and join me. Brother Dan?